Welcome to Whispers of Crime, where we unveil crimes and buried secrets, sharing stories that have never been told before. The horrifying truths will gradually be revealed through each piece of the puzzle in our tales. Right now, join us as we explore a mysterious case involving a woman, a serial killer. The I-95 highway stretched endlessly under the gray Florida sky. The gusts of wind kicked up dust, obscuring visibility, yet they could not hide the desolation of weary travelers stopping for a break. In the dim light of an old gas station, Karen emerged. Her sunburnt face and vacant eyes reflected a past burdened with darkness, but to those passing by, she was just a nameless drifter. No one knew that Karen had turned these highways into a stage for her sordid tale. The rides she hitchhiked were not as innocent as they seemed, and the darkness within her seemed to blend with the shadows of the wild forests lining the road. In the stillness of the night, the only sounds were the hum of engines and the wind rustling through the leaves. Yet somewhere, a faint scent of blood and impending horror lingered. Tonight, another victim would never return home. Along the highway, signs displayed the faces of missing persons, reminding passers-by of stories left unresolved. Local police had launched numerous investigations, but every effort seemed to vanish into the thick veil of mystery. In the police station, Detective William Ford sifted through piles of files. Images flashed before him. A middle-aged man with a weak smile, a hopeful young man, all had disappeared without a trace. Deep within him he sensed something was amiss, a connection he had yet to uncover. Were all these disappearances related? A forgotten clue, a killer lurking right under their noses? Meanwhile, Karen sat quietly in a roadside cafe, her vacant gaze lost in the distance. She recalled the face of the last man, the hurried words he spoke before she snuffed out his life. But nothing pierced her heart, except for the emptiness. Each act of violence had grown easier, as if she was no longer human. On a moonless night, Karen hit the road again. This time, she picked up a middle-aged man returning home after a long day of work. He suspected nothing as she gently asked for a ride. Within minutes, the atmosphere thickened when he inquired about her journey. Karen responded with well-rehearsed lies. Then, the decisive moment arrived. Her hand quietly reached for the gun hidden in her purse. Silence engulfed them, broken only by the metallic click as the weapon was drawn. In a few brief seconds, his life slipped away, and once again, Karen descended into her own darkness. She felt nothing. No fear, no regret, only an emptiness clinging to her like a ghost. The man slumped in his seat, his final terrified gaze etched in her memory. Once everything was over, Karen calmly exited the vehicle. She walked along the highway as if nothing had happened, but this time, a strange sensation crept within her. The darkness began to weigh heavier. She realized that no matter how hard she tried, she could not escape something darker. Herself. The dawn light began to break over the quiet highway, but the dark secrets remained hidden. Detective William Ford stared intently at the map spread across his desk, dotted with red marks indicating the locations of missing persons. Everything seemed disjointed, like a puzzle with a missing piece. Ford furrowed his brow. Throughout the night, he had reviewed all the files. One new detail emerged. All the victims were middle-aged men, killed near rest stops along the highway. He could not dismiss the faint thread connecting these deaths. A sudden phone call broke his concentration. An officer reported finding the body of a middle-aged man near the I-95 highway, a body just discovered that morning. Ford immediately grabbed his coat and dashed out of the office. He knew time was running out. At the same time, Karen sat in a cheap motel where the dim yellow light cast shadows on the peeling walls. She looked into an old mirror, staring deep into herself, and for a moment, she felt something. The faces of her victims flashed before her eyes, only to fade away like a fleeting nightmare. But this time, the haunting could no longer be easily dismissed. The weight of her actions began to press heavily on her mind, as the mask she had worn for so long started to crack. At the crime scene, Ford meticulously observed every detail. The body of the man was found in a car parked on the side of the road, seated motionless, with death delivered by a fatal bullet. There were no clear signs, no clues left behind. But Ford understood that this silence was indicative of an experienced killer. The familiar sounds of cameras clicking and the voices of forensic officers filled the air, But in Ford's mind, only one thought lingered. This would not be the last time. He sensed the presence of the murderer, an invisible ghost wandering the roads, and he knew he was racing against time. After leaving the scene, Ford began searching for other clues. He followed leads from previous cases, gathering reports and testimonies from those who had narrowly escaped strange encounters with a woman seeking rides. Gradually, the murky picture began to clarify. A woman, unnamed, unknown, always appeared when the crimes occurred. Could she be the killer Ford was hunting? Meanwhile, Karen sensed something shifting. She no longer felt the satisfaction she once did after each act. Instead, an invisible fear began to seep into her mind. The screams of her victims echoed in her thoughts, even though they had died in silence. She could not escape the dark memories closing in around her. Ford stepped into a roadside cafe, where he had arranged to meet an important witness, a man who had once encountered a mysterious woman hitchhiking. As he entered, the heavy atmosphere enveloped the place, as if time had come to a standstill. The middle-aged man sat in the corner, his cautious gaze scanning the room. "Did you see her?" Ford asked after taking a seat. He noticed the man gripping his coffee cup tightly, his face tense. She was very strange," the man replied, his voice trembling. "At first, she seemed harmless, but when I looked into her eyes, I felt something was off. There was something very dark within her." Ford listened intently, absorbing every word, sensing the man's fear. Clues began to interlink, like the final pieces of a horrific puzzle. The killer was not just a woman hitchhiking, she was a demon disguised as a person. As Ford continued his investigation, Karen delved deeper into her dark plans. She knew she had gone too far, with no way back. But could she run forever? The shadows of her past began to chase her, threatening to consume her in a sea of guilt. In the darkness of an abandoned parking lot, Karen sat silently in her old truck, gazing through the windshield at a small rest area. The stillness felt eerie. Raindrops from the earlier storm lingered on the pavement, reflecting the dim lights from afar. Something was off. Karen sensed someone watching her from a distance. Cold stares pierced through the tranquil night, causing her anxiety to spike. She rarely felt threatened, but tonight was different. In recent nightmares, the faces of the men she had encountered haunted her, becoming clearer each time. All the memories of them clung to her, as if they were returning to demand something. But this time, Karen was not just fearful of the past. She knew someone was hunting her. Someone unlike the others, Ford. Ford, the talented detective with relentless determination, was closing in. The deeper he delved into the case, the more he understood the complex nature of Karen. Not merely a random killer. He knew she had meticulously planned every move, but now he was narrowing the gap. As Ford continued his investigation, he realized time was no longer on his side. Karen was not as easy to catch as he had imagined. She was not merely a serial killer. She was intelligent, knowing how to hide and adapt to every situation. Ford discovered more victims, far exceeding the initial reports he had received. Missing men who never returned. Their traces vanished into the void, leaving unanswered mysteries. In the dim light of his hotel room, Ford stared at a picture of Karen. Her smirk in the photo sent chills down his spine. He knew the person he was pursuing was not just a cold-blooded killer. She had the ability to manipulate her victims, making them believe she was a close friend before revealing her true nature. Ford had pinpointed Karen's next destination, a desolate rest stop on the outskirts of town. Tonight would be the deciding night. He knew this was his only chance to confront her. From a distance, he watched Karen exit her vehicle. She appeared normal, unsuspecting, but her eyes held a chilling, mysterious gleam. "There's no way out now," Ford whispered, stepping out of his car and moving closer to her. Karen showed no signs of surprise. She turned to face him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her tone light yet full of challenge. Ford took confident strides toward Karen, gun drawn. His heart raced, but his resolve remained unshaken. She had taken too many lives, devastated too many families, and it was time for her to pay. But Karen did not flinch. She gazed at Ford as if everything was still within her calculations. The weak light from the street lamp cast a mysterious shadow across her cheekbones. The smile on her lips unsettled Ford. "You will never understand, will you?" Karen said. her voice soft yet sarcastic. Ford tightened his grip on the gun. "There's nothing to understand, Karen. You're just a murderer." Karen shook her head, slowly advancing toward Ford, as if he were not a threat. "You'll never see the true face of them, of those men." She paused, her cold eyes locking onto Ford's. "They're not innocent. None of them are true victims. I chose the ones who deserved to die." Ford hesitated. Karen's words seeped into his mind like meaningless justifications, yet they also stirred questions within him. "That's not your call," he replied firmly. "The law decides who is guilty and who isn't." Karen shrugged. "The law has failed. You know that?" Ford refused to let her continue. "It's over, Karen. You've gone too far." Karen stared intently at Ford, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You'll never catch me," she whispered, almost like a curse, before turning and fleeing into the night. Ford sprinted after her, footsteps echoing in the silent rest area. She was quick, but he was not ready to give up. The dark pathways and narrow alleys felt suffocating, yet Ford remained determined. The distance between them was closing. Suddenly, Karen spun around. "You shouldn't chase me, Ford," she screamed, her voice now filled with rage. "Don't make me do this." Ford ignored her threat. The closer he got to Karen, the more convinced he became that he would end this nightmare here and now. Then, abruptly, a gunshot rang out. Ford halted, a sharp pain shooting through his left shoulder. Karen had been faster than he expected. He dropped to his knees, his gun slipping from his grasp. Karen approached, her weapon still aimed at him. "You should never have intervened in this, Ford," she said, her voice now strangely soothing, almost comforting. "But now it's too late." Ford gritted his teeth, clutching his wound. The pain was not enough to make him surrender. "No, it can't end like this," he gasped, looking directly at Karen. Karen closed her eyes and sighed. Our ending was destined. But before she could pull the trigger again, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the air. The flashing lights from police cars flickered in the darkness, and Ford knew his team had arrived just in time. Karen turned, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. She had not anticipated being cornered like this. Her eyes darted back to Ford, but this time, the challenge was gone. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not like this." The police surged in, surrounding Karen from all sides. She was out of options. Ford struggled to rise, his eyes tracking her every move. Karen had finally been captured, but Ford did not feel victorious. A heavy emptiness settled in his mind. The case had closed, but the events would haunt Ford. Karen's story was not just the journey of a killer. It was a tale of pain, trauma, and mistakes on both sides, the hunter and the hunted. Yet in the end, darkness consumed everything, leaving no clear answers to the questions Ford had once asked.